Hi, I'm Kevin Werbach, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies, from broadband to blockchain. Today, AI is promising to transform our world. But AI needs accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's developed and deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. Waxell started out creating a sales engagement platform and ended up building a control plane for autonomous AI agents to address the challenges of agents spending wildly, leaking data, exposing vulnerabilities, and spawning more agents outside the governance perimeter. In this conversation, CEO Logan Kelly walks me through what agent governance looks like in practice and what it means to make it accessible to business people in addition to entrepreneurs. Logan, great to have you. Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI.
Thanks, Kevin. Nice to be here.
As I understand it, you didn't start out trying to build an agent governance company. So tell us the story of how you wound up doing Waxell.
Yeah. So we started as a sales engagement platform kind of built from the ground up with AI, and quickly realized that people didn't really want to learn another software, especially we were focused at that time on kind of the SMB, right? So they had HubSpot and some of them had the Sales Lofts and Outreach.ios of the world. There's a million tools. So we said, what if we could just do everything for the user? And that, kind of has become what we call agents. And then once we launched the agents, it was like, wow, we're not kind of at the mercy of them clicking a button to be, spending money on the tokens. That agent starts working, it's going to burn all the tokens. Then it becomes a data, quality issue. And then it becomes, did it say the right thing? And so as we launched these, like early last year, we started to look around for platforms that could do this. And we couldn't really find anything because it was, we were pretty early and it's just such a complicated world where if somebody solves this problem, there's a lot of open source code and this kind of stuff. And that kind of led us to, we have a small team and we've got smart people who are not engineers. And so we needed to give them a surface that they could really be a part of that. And that, as we, have progressed in the company, that's become a big value prop because agentic governance shouldn't just be a bunch of engineers running around with their hair on fire. It should be, finance, legal, compliance. Everybody needs to have the visibility and the ability to do that. So that we kind of innovated through, the problem and ended up getting a lot more excited about, the controlling agents and building a really sweet governance surface as opposed to, just being another sales engagement tool.
So you define the problem set. How do you understand what the solution is that's needed to address that agent governance challenge?
Yeah. In the early days, it was problems that came to us, right? So you see the behavior of an agent. And these are probabilistic and very, very complex, right? So, there's this, you can start to try to govern the prompt, right? And you can start to try to inject, different instructions into a prompt, but you start to realize very quickly as you deploy agents, or you should, that you start to need to, the AI is telling the agent to take a certain action. So now it's running a function and now it's accessing a database and now you have human identity, right? So the early days of understanding kind of this like primordial soup of all the different problems that could be contained in agentic governance were kind of experiential. And then we took a step back and said, we need a lab that we can start to, really experiment and test with different use cases and different, agentic frameworks and different runtimes and all of this. So we've gone from experiential to very much a day-to-day new system comes into play. And now you put it into the lab and you try to break it. You try to see what the behavior is and, who in a company is going to be, or what element of a company is it a cybersecurity issue or finance issue, these kinds of things.
Walk us through then what the solution you built looks like.
Yeah, so we call it the control plane. So in an organization, you have what we would classify as three sets of agents. So a lot of companies who are just getting started with agents, the agents that they know best are things like Cloud Code, Cloud Cowork, right? Copilot, these kinds of things that are interfaces with a with a user, but they're not built by the company. And that kind of creates this whole surface of, okay, you have an agent, right, where a user is saying to do something, and now it's going to go access the file system, or it's going to go, potentially, like in Cloud Code, like could delete a production database. It's happened. And so we have that. And so that's called Waxell Connect, where we have on machine apps that get downloaded, and then we have the kind of control plane, our interface, where the organization can start to put policies in place using what we call dynamic policy injection that says, if this happens, and we have 45 different policy categories, and then that extends to, okay, I've got a lane chain agent that is doing, actuarial, work automated for us. You have to instrument that. So we have an SDK to instrument that data is also then, the observability and the governance is done through the control plane. And then the third piece is we have a governed runtime system that allows agents to run in a kind of the entire envelope. The entire runtime is encrypted, has, all these different, access points for governance, where like human identity or non-human identity is managed and all of that. So you put that all together, we have what we call the control plane. Everything that could possibly happen around agents is connected. You have the governance or the observability, and then you have the governance that can then, is what, kind of the rest of the org, not just the engineers, can kind of log into and use to, control things.
Yeah. So how unique is it to each organization? You talk about lots of different policies and so forth. Does a company need to understand what it needs for agent governance in
Yeah.
order to configure it
Here's
properly?
the cool thing about how we did it is like, uh, an executive, right? So a business owner, right? Not an engineer,
Hmm.
comes in and they look at their, the line item on their P&L, and it's
Hmm.
like, they go to their CFO, like, whoa, what was that? Right. And then it's like, we spent a lot of money on OpenAI last month, right? It's like, okay, cool. I want to control cost. We have, in Waxel, we have this thing called a policy pack, where it's like somebody who is a non-business owner can say, hey, we need to implement these policies, and then an engineer can then scope them down. So maybe there's a tool or a workflow or a certain class of agents or a user set, these kinds of things. So they can scope it down and make it a little bit less, you know, every single agent shouldn't be able to spend more than this amount of money, right? Which I think becomes problematic when you have millions of different agent executions. So so we've built it so that there's kind of objective overlays, and then there's, security framework and compliance
Hmm.
framework overlays, right? We've got like a NIST pack and an OWASP LLM pack, right?
Hmm.
So I think the way we've tried to architect this is the non-engineers can be intent first in the platform. The engineers can get, all the kind of, deep, tool call, agent, user group, audit trails, all that kind of stuff if they need.
What is it you mentioned a couple times, the engagement with non-engineers, both in your own team and in the customers? What does it take to build something that addresses the needs of those groups?
I mean, anybody who's built software products for people, right? It's a lot of iteration and a lot of
Yeah.
like, conversation and what's important and that kind of thing. And one of the cool things now, and this isn't the first product I've ever built. One of the cool things now with AI is it's such an important piece of the puzzle for companies, right? Like there's board pressure, there's market pressure, right? It's something that has to get done. And I think that when we're in these conversations, we're getting a lot of feedback about, this is how I look at the world, right? And it's like, okay, cool. We can translate this data, and what we've seen is these really cool conversations with customers that say, this is this is kind of what I'm facing. Awesome. Well, here's a custom dashboard for that, right? And that allows people to kind of short circuit needing to learn an entire concept of agentic governance, which by the way changes every day, right? Like we have a lab that's running 1,000 agents a day on all these different frameworks. So like if you think you know what it is, wait a day, right?
What are the things that the customers, the prospective customers, come to you with most? You mentioned that the cost issue is one
Yeah.
thing, but what are the other challenges
Yeah.
they
I
see?
think cost is where people start. I think it's the easy place to start. But then kind of with these on machine, Cloud Cowork, Cloud Code, Codex, these kinds of things, there's a big concern about, are we exfiltrating RIP? Are we exfiltrating PII? Uh, does Claude Cowork or Claude Code somehow get around the kind of, role-based access that I have implemented in my company? Um, and so I was talking to a chief security officer the other day, and there's this like concept of like, I almost don't want to know, because once I know, right, there's going to be a lot of work involved. And so I think where a lot of the work right now is starting to happen and needs to happen is understanding that Claude Code and Cowork and all these tools are super powerful, but there needs to be the layer that we already have when you think about like email and just connecting an app to your Microsoft O365 account gets admin permission. So you have MCPs that people are just adding into their, agents. And it's like, do we know that those tools are actually trustworthy? So are you fingerprinting them and these kinds of things? So I think there's this external agent piece that is where most companies are starting. I think the further ahead companies or the kind of more like data science driven companies are, okay, I've got this, eight agent kind of fleet that works together to solve one problem. How do I, use something that's better than like the normal APM, like a Datadog or something, to really see how those agents are, we call it lineage, how they're all communicating with each other. But I think the real thing that we need, that organizations are worried about and are focused on with us, is that, what's on my employee's machine, and what kind of attack surfaces is that,
Yeah.
laying out for people.
Yeah, and you've alluded to some of this already, but can you say a little bit more about how that agent governance process is different from what they might already be doing, either for data governance or ML
Yeah.
ops or observability and things like that?
Yeah. It's the funny thing is, like, there's been a lot with like AI governance and prompt level governance and all of this and AI gateways and all this, but where things start to explode in people's faces is that, say, we've got an enterprise open AI contract. We know that the
Hmm.
data that, is being sent to OpenAI is private, at least that's what they attest. Um, but when that comes back with a like ChatGPT or something like this, that comes back as text or something that the user
Hmm.
interacts with, that's fine. That's like, okay, cool.
Hmm.
We know that flow is probably safe, right? Now, did the person put, my customer's username and password and address and social security number in it? That could be problematic. But if we've got some level of, okay, are we using a private LLM? That kind of AI governance is good. The problem, though, with that agentic governance looks to solve is basically that model is telling an application what to do on that machine. That is a whole level of kind of complexity, right? That is very difficult for any of the tools that are currently sitting on people's machines to actually intercept before something bad happens, right? And that's where we're seeing data exfiltration. We just saw a supply
Hmm.
chain attack in NPM where like people are just have Claude Code, downloading stuff onto their machine that they've downloaded 9,000 times, and they didn't check that, whoa, you shouldn't download that today. And how, what tool in anybody's tool shed right now solves that if you're not specifically, focused on agentic governance.
Mhm. And how do you solve it? Given that these are non-deterministic tools, there is this agent interaction problem that's out
hmm
there.
So we believe that when it comes down to it, a policy, whether it's a HR policy or a spending policy, whatever it is, there becomes a level of binariness to it, right? So can you or can't you do that? And that's how we see policies need to work. And so abstractly, our goal is to find in every policy category that we work with, you set rules. And then our goal and how we've structured our systems is to find the deterministic invariance of that particular thing that's happening. So uh, Claude Code has tools, for example, right? So if it's going to do if it's going to run a bash script, and make an API call or something, it's going to call that particular tool. And then that tool is going to have inputs. And so you can intercept all of that, right? And so now you can evaluate those and you can say yes or no. And you have to do it fast or the user experience sucks. And then, people start to, try to bypass governance, which is the age old, that's what everybody tries to do in every other type of governance. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so it's rules and then find the invariance of something that happens. They feel like
Mhm.
magic and they feel like black boxes, but they're not, right? There are things that that you can, and then once you find those seams and those surfaces, now you can start to inject governance at different before, during, and after, right?
Yeah.
You can, inject kind of long-term, budget or long-term bias or these kinds of, governance because you have all of that data. And so, yeah, that's to me, that's the most fun part of looking at any of this is it's like finding how do you, get your finger in the crack as you're, trying to scale the wall of governance here.
Yeah, what was the most challenging aspect for you to build?
Uh, Claude Cowork runs on virtual machines, and so do a lot of these. So that's really difficult because they've kind of made it into this like
Right.
self-contained
But
thing.
that makes it more secure at some level, at least more limited.
But well, you think, right? But the problem
Mhm.
is it still can, with a virtual machine, you can still mount a file start, right? So it still
Uh-huh.
can go get files from a machine, right?
Uh,
So it still can do that, and then it can grab that and it can send it to something. So it's like, in a lot of ways, it's more dangerous than something like
yeah.
Claude Code. That Claude Code can still, can run bash scripts and stuff, but you have hooks, you have all this stuff that you can. So with Cowork, we've actually built tooling for machines on Mac and Windows that can kind of interact with the different, components of Cowork on the machine to do that. But yeah, Cowork is uh
Basically.
the coolest. And what the funniest part of that is like Cowork is used by the least technical people in the company. So Cowork could say, I'm going to do this thing. And it's like all this, gobbledygook, command stuff. And somebody's like, I guess so, accept, right? And then it does it. That should be intercepted.
You've talked a few times about policies. How much
Mhm.
do organizations even understand what their policies are, or more broadly, what their risk tolerance is? Because obviously there's some level of trade-off here.
Yeah. What's funny, like risk tolerance, I think there's like the concept of like marginal gains, right? We're
Mhm.
we're like in the time of like maximal gains, right? There are no
Yeah.
trade-offs right now, right? It's like get policies in place, right? Get cost policies in place, data access policies in place. You're not going to make any trade-offs. They're going to run
Mhm.
milliseconds slower, but you're going to feel a lot better, right? I think when we look at risk profiles, that's something that Waxell does is each
Mhm.
policy category shows, we call it blast radius, right? So if this happens, here's what's going to happen in your company. And we rate the kind of, here's the things that are generally should be looked at. So as you come in, you kind of have this like boilerplate, right? Here's what good governance looks like in an agentic fleet. But then as you have your agents running, Waxell basically says, hey, this is an ungoverned database. You just
Okay.
made an ungoverned raw Postgres
Mhm.
query. Don't do that anymore, right? Here's the policy to create and put it in place.
Um, One of the challenges is agents can spawn sub agents,
Yeah,
and then you get this fan out. How do you deal with that challenge?
it is irresponsible to deploy something like that without having the understanding of how to control that, right? And the way we look at this is we we call it agent lineage, right? So you have parent, children, siblings, you know,
Mhm.
generally speaking. But then you need a way to ensure that kind of identity, lineage is not lost across that. And so that's really where we use a lot of, runtime kind of there's like a cryptographic element to it, right? Where things are stamped, where they're running. So, if it's not in the actual code, it's from a runtime environment, right? So you can start to there needs to be defense and depth around that, because that if you don't have that, then you can't fire a kill switch. Kill switches are the thing that, say something just spawned 20 agents and is iteratively spawning agents. You need to be able to kill that whole lineage in one click of a button, or you're going to have a big problem. You need to start shutting down cloud resources, all that kind of stuff. So, uh, lineage and defense and depth on that. I can say that's one of the unsung heroes of what we've done, because that is not a fun thing for any developer to try to build that themselves.
Yeah, but as you say, it's a really critical thing in this agentic
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
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 Um, well, so broadly, there are people that focus in more on that identity piece. That fundamentally the key challenge is identifying and observing agents. The people who focus more on the security piece and other aspects. How do you look at what's really the core of agent governance?
So the problem is, like, you've got some walled gardens springing up, right? So you got ServiceNow, and I think they just launched something cool with NVIDIA. I haven't looked into it too much. I think they're calling it Control Tower, which is awesome. But ServiceNow is this walled garden. Then you have Agentforce, walled gardens. Then you have Claude putting out, this different stuff. And then you've got 9,000 uh, agent frameworks and new ones popping up every day. And you've got different, vector databases that you can use in all of this. So the problem is, um, if you if you try to go vendor locked, right, then you
Mhm.
lose all this beauty of what happens in AI, right? Because there's always something that's cool that's happening in AI that you should have somebody on your team looking at that. New blog article comes out, you see it on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever,
All right.
like, go install it, let's go, let's build it.
Mhm.
So then if you focus on okay, I'm going to secure things at for what's in this moment of time, and I
Mhm.
built this like security for this moment of time, and that's only for this set or that or that. I think you're not future proofing the infrastructure. So the way we see it is, like, have the overlay, have everything plugged in, make it easy to plug in, and then over time, what we're doing is partnering with the security companies, partnering with these different companies, because you have to have the overlay that everything can bubble up into, so that you have that single pane of glass that, okay, I have these agents over here, these agents over here, and then, my dev team is about to push a whole new class of agents that I got to, like, see what was happening and then build the policies before they, go out the door. So I think if you're building a kind of point solution right now, it's kind of that whole, like, you can see what's it like, you can see an electron either where it is or how fast it's moving, but you can't see both at the same time. I think that's what we've got going on in AI, right? So
Right.
we're trying to say, go build the
Right.
entire,
Right.
the capsule that all my stuff is going to run in, and then you can start doing cool stuff with it.
What about the shadow agent problem where organizations don't even realize what someone's deploying?
Yeah. Uh, so I think that's like that is the craziest problem right now, because it's like, on one hand, somebody finds this cool thing that the company doesn't know about. That should be like, they should get a cake, right? And we should all clap because that's awesome. Thank you for trying to make my company better, right? And then on the other side, it's like, whoa, 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 but what is happening with this, right? Um, and so what we've built is on machine apps that are looking at the kind of what's going out from the network, and we have a catalog, I think, of like 15,000 different API URLs, and we're constantly building that. So it's like, okay, is there API? Are there calls coming from this machine that are not part of the governed flows and part of the governed agents? And then that gets brought to an admin's attention, and then they can basically turn those off. So kind of classic API gateway, but at the machine level, not at like the firewall or network level.
Mhm. And you mentioned kill switches. How is it possible to shut something down once it's in deployment, especially if there's child agents and so forth?
Yeah. So the old way of doing this was you just turn off the cloud resource, right? Just turn off the machine. It's uh, but that's problematic, right? Because sig kill, everything goes away. So your audit trail is gone, all the cost
Yeah.
data is gone, everything is gone, right?
Right.
And so the way we see it is, this is where like protecting state, like agent state at all times, right, is the most important thing. So if the agent's progressing, it's creating, it might be accessing different data, resources, and might be, we talked about generating cost, all of this. There might be intermediate work products that are still salvageable, right? So it might have written the blog article, but didn't get to the, place that it, checked all the sources or something, right? Okay, we shouldn't throw that away, right? So what you have to do is you have to protect the state of the agent at all costs, which means you have to have what we call a agent envelope, right? That everything is kind of hitting that envelope. It's not hitting the actual functions that are running. Like if you put the electron microscope on it, and so uh, the kill switch comes into the envelope. The envelope is then going to manage the shutdown of the actual agent. And the nice thing is, once you have the infrastructure and the runtime sorted, this becomes a much less challenging issue, especially if you're managing the kind of
Right.
agent lineage and all of that. But if you're just running like raw lang chain, or these different, agent frameworks on like a celery task or something, that kill switch you're gonna just lose all the data. That's problematic when you think about like, well, I've got a HIPAA
Mhm.
auditor, I've got all these different things, right? You've got to have that data preserved. So that's kind of the kill switch in theory. Turn off the machine. In
Mhm.
practice, that doesn't fly. You need to have
Yeah.
something very graceful, that's very protected and slow.
And going forward, what do you think are the next challenges, risks, dangers we're going to see with agents?
I think the biggest risk is that people don't trust them, and the whole concept slows
Yep.
down greatly. Um, I think the risk of agents, we know what they are, right? Theoretically, right? Cost and data access, and it could do something. You had Mythos breaking out of its harness, right? That would be a good idea to just send a sig kill to the process on the machine, right? They like it. That's not real, right? They just didn't build their harness right. Um, so it's like, I think the biggest risk with agents is that companies don't get to see the value of the agent because they don't have the governance infrastructure. Every single technology that we've ever put in place, right, has always brought inherent risks. Cloud infrastructure created a whole attack surface, right? But we adopted it like crazy, and now it's a pretty secure world. obviously there's always people trying to break into it. So yeah, I think that that's a bigger risk than, any one thing that, an agent might be able to do.
Hmm? And then finally, how do you see this landscape of governance providers around agents evolving? You talked about the value of a general purpose layer versus the walled gardens, but what do you see as the future of the space?
I think that there's going to be so much parity. Like this week, I use Cloud Code a lot, and then Cloud Code started, kind of being weird. So I spun up Codex for the first time, and so now I'm using Codex. So I think there's so much model parity, right? I think
Mhm.
there's so much provider parity that a well-constructed organization is going to have the kind of workflows internally to say, this model is right for this, or this provider is right for this, and this provider is right for that. And so that's why I believe that over time, it's kind of crazy to think that a company would commit to a walled garden agentic infrastructure. And so I think that's where, and you already see the explosion of observability companies right now, which observability, you can't govern what you can't observe. So I think there's going to be movement of those types of companies into governance, I hope, right? Because, it'd be nice to have some, analogs here. So I think that the general purpose governance layer, I think, is what's going to win, because that's what the big money in the space is going to kind of ask for, right? Let me have an opportunity to compete. You see that with OpenAI puts out 5.5. Now they're saying, let's get all the Cloud Code users, right? So they're not going to want walled gardens all over the place. Otherwise, we go back into this like year-long lockdown and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, general purpose, I think, is going to be what wins, and then who can plug the most kind of accoutrements into the different, pieces.
Great. Well, Logan, thank you so much. We got to wrap up, but really appreciate your time in the conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.